We're going to start out this morning with Bethany. Bethany serves as the Director of Strategic Projects at Main Street America. She oversees the MSA partner grant projects like backing small business, T-Mobile hometown grants, as well as other special projects, including the Main Street Disaster Preparedness Program. Many of you all have, as local program directors, have been in contact with Bethany with many of these projects. And so we really thank you, Bethany, for your work that you're doing at Main Street America. But previously, she served as Executive Director of Newtown Loans, Middle Georgia, first and only certified community development financial institution. So welcome, Bethany. We will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Kayla and Keith. Hi, everybody. And just one other piece about my background. I also was a Main Street manager in my hometown in Danville, Kentucky for about 5 years before I moved into the community finance space here in Georgia. And I lived in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina. I was working in preservation and also on my dissertation. And so a lot of my research work and my community engagement work was centered not only on the recovery from Hurricane Katrina, but the BP oil spill. I was part of a team that studied the social and economic impacts of the BP oil spill that happened around the same time. So I've kind of circled back into this space and this work because this is becoming more important and relevant to our whole network. Let me pull up my slideshow here before I forget that part. So, as we all know, disasters are increasing and intensifying. This is some data we pulled for our research, and almost 90% of U.S. counties have declared a natural disaster in the last decade. In a survey we did in 2022 of the main streets we surveyed, about 70% had experienced a natural disaster outside of the COVID pandemic in the last 5 years. And so because of the intensity and the increasing natural disasters happening in our main streets, we did publish this resource last year. It was called the Main Street Disaster and Resilience Toolkit. And Keith is going to drop this link into the chat so you guys can access this and download it. And if you have not had a chance to take a look, I hope you will. We use this toolkit, one, as an opportunity to simply understand how disasters are starting to impact our main streets, to get a better sense of just this challenge and how, as Main Street managers and as coordinating programs and as Main Street America, we can support Main Street managers in disaster planning, recovery, and resilience. Here are some of the themes that we learned. One is that most of our main streets don't have a plan or even strategy specifically related to disaster planning and recovery and resilience. I think in our survey in 2022, maybe 20% had a plan, but in most cases, those were main streets housed in city governments, and they had helped develop a plan that was citywide, but it wasn't one specific to the main street, either district or organization. Main Street managers, we are chaos coordinators. That's just a fact. We're conveners. All Main Street managers end up playing significant roles in recovery in a disaster. And so the more we can help you prepare for that in advance, the more effective you're going to be able to be. One of the big findings we found is that, and this was something we learned more so from our coordinators than our Main Street managers, but usually main streets recover more quickly from disasters than their neighboring communities that don't have Main Street programs, because you can get your small businesses back online. And this really jumpstarts community activity. It allows volunteers to be able to come to town, more first responders to be able to come, but that activity, the business activity, the return to normalcy really helps bring businesses or residents back home as well. I know some of you have recently dealt with disasters in your communities, and one of the important things we've learned was, even though it felt like a burden, and in some cases Main Street managers are debate if they should hold events and programs or maybe a festival after a disaster, but it turns out they are so critical to the social and emotional health of your communities post-disaster. And so even if it's like a lesser version of your programming, if you can keep it going, that's so important for continuity And they also end up being really important events and opportunities for resource connection to help support recovery. You should start working on building infrastructure to welcome volunteers and accept donations. Folks are going to want to help. Some of the most moving stories we collected in the research were the ways folks from neighboring main streets and your regions, your state coordinating programs want to help. But a lot of times you have to take advantage of that window right after the disaster to leverage that interest and support. And it's hard to juggle that with some of the immediate things that you have to deal with on the ground as a Main Street manager and your businesses have to deal with, simply assessing damage, filling out paperwork, that kinds of things. So if you can have that infrastructure in place in advance, you're going to be able to take advantage of the folks who really want to help. And you can also help prepare your main streets and your stakeholders to be sure that they don't fall for scams. And we've seen everything from bad general contractors coming to town to folks who will pose as businesses in your Main Street districts and apply for your grants. So if you can have infrastructure in place, you're going to be able to prevent some of those scams from happening in your community. And you're going to have to prioritize self-care in this process. Recovery is a long game, and it really will require a phased approach. So one of the most important things to know, and we talk about this a lot in the toolkit, is that you should right-size this process and start where it makes sense for you. You do not have to do a plan, even a few critical strategies, and I'm going to talk through a handful in just a moment, but start with what makes sense for you. First, you need to understand your risks. You can use the FEMA risk index here. You can see Missouri there. St. Louis is high. We know tornadoes and flooding, obviously for you, at least at a regional level, are key. But there may be local elements that also, are going to potentially influence the kind of risk or disaster or crises you experience. So you're going to need to take those into account, and that's going to affect the kind of strategies or plan that you choose to draw up for your Main Street. And make sure you're not repeating anything. Make sure there aren't local plans already in place. Do you have inventories of your district already in place? Maybe your certified local government already has an inventory of important historic and cultural resources. And who do you already collaborate well with? This is going to be really helpful to think about what's the low-hanging fruit for you to start with and right-size your process. And most importantly, what's your capacity right now? What's your capacity as a manager? What's the capacity of your organization? And what are your strengths? Are you great at promotions? Is marketing and communication to stakeholders going to be a place where you could thrive? Or do you really excel with small business support? And so some small business recovery training will be a place where you could really step up. And that might be a place now in blue sky days where you can start to build out that infrastructure. And so the 5 strategies, preparation strategies that I'm going to talk through today are activities that you're already engaged in as Main Street managers, some more than others, again, depending on your capacity and strengths as a Main Street. But you can go ahead and start to work on these things now, really bolster these strategies and processes so that they can be really powerful recovery tools in the event that you do experience a natural disaster or other kind of crisis. The one thing that I do want to say is today I'm going to focus on these 5 strategies, but they're sort of more internally focused, like things that you can do as a Main Street. But the Main Streets who recover the fastest, who manage to implement the most effective responses, or even who implement really strategic resilience projects, they have built really powerful partnerships. And in some cases, non-traditional partnerships with everything from the Red Cross locally, right, to folks like your local emergency manager. So the toolkit is great for strategies around building community connections and building pathways to funding. So be sure to take a look at that in the toolkit when you have a chance. So when we talk to Main Streets and we say what would be the most strategic best next step for you to take when it comes to disaster planning and preparation, and almost all folks say, I'm going to start with a communications plan, because you do play this really critical role in communicating with your stakeholders on a regular basis. You've built that trust, you've built those communication pathways, and they also know how to get a hold of you this is probably the most important place to focus initially. So one of the most important things as a Main Street manager you're going to need to do in a disaster recovery context is curate, curate, curate. Folks are going to be overwhelmed and they're going to need your help in directing them to the resources that are most applicable and likely even very simple instructions when possible. If your team can help you take all those resources that are available and not only tailor and guide folks to those resources and the ones that are going to be the most applicable, but if you can give them instructions on how to do that, you're going to find that it's going to be a lot easier for your stakeholders to take advantage of those resources. And you can go ahead now and determine what are going to be your sources of information. Are you going to work with the SBDC? Is your local emergency manager going to be able to distribute important information around things like trash pickup, toxic product pickup, those kinds of things? Where are you going to get the information? You can determine that now. And go ahead and think about backup methods of communication. This depends in part on the kind of risks or natural disasters that you will likely face, but some folks have used text threads and text tree communication. And in the case of some of our main streets in Vermont, when they were dealing with very severe flooding, not only did they lose internet, but folks just weren't in their storefronts on a regular basis. So they had to create weekly meetings, physically gather folks once a week to share stakeholder information and be sure to regularly update contact lists for this piece. If a communications plan, a formal plan is of interest to you, there's some resources in the toolkit around communications planning, specifically from the Oklahoma Nonprofit Center. So this is a space where more Main Streets are asking us for a lot of support. As you'll learn here in just a moment, insurance claims take a while to pay. Unemployment checks take a while to get delivered to maybe some of your team and your small businesses who had to be laid off. And federal funding is meant to come in at the end and fill those unmet needs. And so to get businesses back online, a lot of times filling that gap so folks can reopen is really important in the Main Street space. And we've been playing a small role now, and I expect we'll play a larger role in supporting Main Streets around crowdfunding in particular, but implementing fundraising techniques where you can make asks in a recovery context to help raise money to get your businesses back online. But there are things you can go ahead and do now, starting to experiment with digital tools. If you do a membership drive or if you seek sponsorships for events now, can you go ahead and implement digital tools or certain platforms and get more sophisticated infrastructure around your fundraising work? Can you learn best practices now about how you make an ask with a crowdfunding campaign? A lot of folks don't have successful campaigns because they don't know how to structure them. But these are practices that you could go ahead and learn now with your everyday Main Street work. And the most important thing here is positioning yourself as a fundraiser for your downtown. We have had Main Streets who launch campaigns to help support businesses in a crisis or in the case of natural disaster recovery, and folks don't trust them. They question their motives. They aren't willing to give. So if you can go ahead and build that trust and establish yourself as a downtown fundraiser, you're going to have a lot more luck supporting businesses in a disaster recovery context. And people are going to want to help after a disaster. There can be a lot of mismatches between what your volunteers can provide and the needs of your community. So if you can recruit in advance and think about specialized skills and equipment, folks who are good with chainsaws, folks who have tractors, we've seen these as really critical in disaster recovery. But also think about the specialized skills outside of physical recovery, CPAs, bankers, insurance agents who could really support your folks around insurance claims, applying for disaster recovery loans, and those kinds of things. We've learned from our Main Streets that in a disaster context, creating a hub, and maybe the Main Street isn't responsible for that, but support your local leadership in building a hub. This is really essential to be sure you're playing effective matchmakers and matching skills that your volunteers have with the actual needs, recovery needs that your communities have. And it's really important to help track your volunteers coming and going. A really critical role that we've seen Main Street managers play in the recovery space, specifically with volunteers, is creating a pipeline of projects. So you can go around to your property owners and your business owners post-disaster and find out what do they need and what kind of skill is it going to take. And that can be really powerful way. And that could also be something your volunteers help you do, is go regularly visit your stakeholders and find out what their needs are and continue to refine that pipeline of recovery projects with the influx of the volunteers coming to help in your community. And this is a really low-hanging fruit and something that you can do either if it is like season for you with tornadoes and storms, hurricane season, or maybe just as part of a downtown district day. This is actually a page from a playbook we took from Guam's Preservation Trust, because they regularly deal with typhoons, was an advisor on our project. And once a month, they go around, they trim tree limbs near buildings and utilities, they clean out and repair storm drains. And in particular, because they have a lot of historic resources, they make repairs and secure loose features. This is, of course, relevant on any kind of property, but our historic structures often have a lot more features that could use securing that can just minimize physical damage in the case of tornadoes, hurricanes, and other kinds of windstorms. And lastly, inventorying your Main Street. And this really comes in two buckets in the Main Street world. There's that general inventory of your district buildings and businesses. And then there's that specialized survey that's required either because you're a National Register Historic District, or if you're a certified local government, that's a SHPO tool where you do a more in-depth survey of the historic and cultural resources. And these are critical for a few reasons. One, whether it's the SHPO survey of your local assets, or even if you do a very basic inventory of your district and you're sure to indicate things that are of value, not only historic structures, but maybe public art, or if there are buildings in your district that have really valuable collections, you can indicate that on a very simple survey. And that just ensures if damage is severe, when folks go in to recover things, that they know they need to handle a certain building or maybe certain items within that building with care. It does help specifically around historic and cultural resources. It makes it clear in advance where disaster assistance funding is going to need to go. And especially having that before disaster documentation of your district with photos and the condition of buildings and lots and any other kind of assets is really necessary, both for insurance claims and recovery grant applications. And I did want to shout out, I don't know how many of you are familiar with our new tool at Main Street America, the Booms Tracker, that is available to all Main Streets. This is a very simple app on your phone where you go in, you can input as many images as you want, but you do have a visual or photo documentation of the condition of the building. And then you fill out some very general information, including condition of the building. And we're about to add a new layer to this that will include a business inventory. But this could be a very simple place to start, to have a baseline status of all your properties, as well as those conditions and the event you need to look to that in the case of a disaster. And just real quick, I'd love to flag what we have coming next in this space so you can keep these things on your radar. First of all, in just a few weeks, we'll be sending out a survey to all of you. We want to better understand your needs around disaster and crisis response. We've had a lot of Main Streets say, we know natural disaster is important and your work is happening here, but we've also had things like active shooters, things like cybersecurity threats, and some of those tools that we've developed for disaster recovery apply. So we're trying to better understand those needs. We are in the process of creating a small business resilience curriculum. So this will be for your small businesses to be more resilient, preparing them for disaster, but also helping them in the case of recovery. That will launch in 2026. We will be providing more technical assistance around emergency fundraising, specifically with crowdfunding. We're going to be creating some guides on specific projects you can do for specific kind of disaster risks. So guides for hurricanes, heat resilience, tornadoes. And we want to create a template for our Main Streets that's very specific to your needs and recovery. So be on the lookout. I'd say most of these tools will be coming at you sometime in 2026. And just real quick, reiterate here, there's my email. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, and be sure and put those in the Q&A section if you have questions related to what Bethany said. And I have a couple comments. I know internally, Gayla and I and the staff have been talking for years about, how do we help our Main Street programs with this? And it's such a complex question. Not only is it the natural disasters, but then you get into, you mentioned active shooters. Many of our main streets put on events and festivals, and we've seen where cars go blazing into festival grounds, and all those things to consider, and cybersecurity. And so I think you're going to see some more stuff from us also when we get into 2026 and in some of those things. I had a conversation doing an assessment visit in Lee Summit with the police officers that are on their board of directors, and they have this new barricade system that's so easy to use and can be very helpful. And it's just understanding and realizing that there are resources out there and what are the most important things that we need to deal with. Bethany, I do have a couple questions.
Mhm.
From the fundraising perspective, are there any best practices on how to get those donated funds out to businesses that need them? Have you seen some good examples of how do we then, once we raise it, push that money out the door, and how do we determine who gets it and who doesn't?
Yeah. Yeah. The biggest thing is that you, to the best of your ability, you want to try to establish those parameters up front, because in the case that you don't have enough money to go around, you want to be clear about why you've decided that the need is greater here. So, to the best of your ability, you want to do that. The other thing that you want to do, Montpelier, Vermont is one of the main streets that's had some of the greatest success, I think, with fundraising and supporting their small businesses with recovery. But they did 2 rounds of a special recovery grant program, and in the first round, they unfortunately had some folks who scammed them, who posed as small businesses. So the other thing that you do want to ask for is either an EIN or a proof of business certificate, those
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things. So
Sure,
so those are 2 ways that you can ensure the money is getting to the
sure.
right place. But I,
Well, and
I
I
think
think
the
that
most
goes back to your
critical
business
thing.
inventory also is, reference it
Yes,
to your
that's right.
business inventory
That's
that
right.
you've collected. Yeah, yeah,
That's right. That's right. So if probably I'd say for a lot of main streets initially, especially if you're having to make choices, focusing on folks that do have the brick and mortar,
hmm,
but it depends. Some folks
right,
have food truck courts that are really vital, and those are the
right.
kinds of things. But yeah, if you even can include those kinds of businesses in your inventory, then that certainly helps too.
Sure. And
Yeah.
I know Michael Poe mentioned this, that the business inventory piece is coming to the Booms app, Booms Tracker
Yeah.
app. Do you know when that's going to happen? That was one of the
And I
questions.
just saw that note from Brenda, but what I can do, although it's a little early PST, but he's got 2 youngins, is maybe ping him while we're on here,
Yeah.
while Andy and Brendan do their thing, and I might be able to come back.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
know it's pending, but I haven't heard the exact date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I saw his session at the national conference, and he said that's coming too. And I was thinking that it was going to be later this year, is what I was. I don't think
Yeah,
it's in
it feels
2026.
imminent. I want to say
Yeah.
like later this summer, but
Yeah.
I better not like
Yeah.
overpromise for
Right.
my
I
my
I think his
my good
comment is
buddy.
now that we built out the hard part, adding things in is going to be the easier part.
That
So
that
hopefully.
that's right. And we may in fact actually add a disaster layer
Mm,
where there's a little more
mhm.
ways that we can help folks pre-document so that it
Yeah.
could be even more valuable tool for
Yeah.
things around insurance claims and things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but the thing I like about Booms Tracker is that, sometimes we have a physical copy of our business inventory, but the Booms is stored in the cloud too, so you can
Mhm.
reach it anywhere if you need it. If your Main Street office catches fire and there went your computer, those sorts of things that we think about having, things stored in the cloud can be very handy no matter where you're at. And I think Kitty in Tennessee or Kentucky talked about that was very helpful for them when they had some flooding in their state.
Yeah.
That's great. Bethany, just one question. And a question that we got this week is there any good tools that really shows, I mean, what the question is immediate response how to make that immediate response when you see, property owners that maybe lost their windows and doors and, giving them funding just to secure property. And then
Mhm.
maybe, I mean, their question is, do we hold on to this little bit of money until when there's a better plan? Or do
Mhm.
immediately just surge with the dollars that has been given
Mhm.
so they don't have on the end, well, you weren't there when I needed you most, or you're waiting for a better
Mhm.
plan. I mean, and
Mhm.
I don't know the answer to that, or do we even know the answer to that?
I would say with yeah, unfortunately there are hard decisions like this that have to get made, and this is why it's helpful to think these things through in advance because, I mean, the reality is your stakeholders are traumatized, but so are you as the Main Street manager and your team. I'd say if not stabilizing the building is going to further damage it and potentially mean you might lose the structure, for instance, then I think that's a case when you want to deploy quickly. Same
Mm-hmm.
with getting, again, the small business activity starts to bring back the other activity. There's a ripple effect there. Yeah, I'm just reading Lisa's note there. Yep. And then I'd say from there, if it doesn't seem like critical to securing the building, I do understand why Main Streets, if they don't have a lot of money, might want to wait and
Mm-hmm.
ask for like the plan or wait. It takes a little while till you can get the quote and understand what the full investment would be and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say if they're in a position where these buildings they might lose them, then some kind of securing grant to stabilize these structures would be a worthwhile thing to look into. And I
Just a
do think
hard
one last thing
questions.
is that fundraising, probably Main Streets are going to benefit from thinking about that fundraising activity at the district level instead of doing it as one-off projects. And then, like he said, having that conversation in advance about then how you decide based on some kind of need structure how you're going to deploy the funds. But deciding that up front is going to save headaches because you can be really transparent from the beginning.
Yeah.
Plan, plan, plan.
Yeah. Well, and also, again, getting in the weeds, but there are stages of recovery. There's the immediate, we've got, life and those sorts of things are always first. And then we move into debris removal and securing buildings. And then, it comes in layers and understanding each of the layers and what role Main Street plays in that. Yep.
All
Awesome.
right.
Thanks, Bethany.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on with Brendan. Brendan is, well, first of all, I want to talk about his mission because I think this is what really relates to all of it, all of us. So Brendan's mission in his career here is to educate clients in regard to their exposure and to secure a comprehensive and competitive price set of policies that protects the historic assets and the organization that operates within. So these are things as we started out that board of directors are always asking our local directors. And if you set as a board of director, you're actually asking this of yourself as well. So all of these things are wrapped into what Bethany started out with, but also making sure that we all have insurance to for our programs, and then how we push that out to our business owners and our property owners at the same time. But Brendan is a client executive at the National Trust Insurance Services, which is a subsidiary of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. He has 20 years of experience in sales strategy, split between the sports industry and being a risk management broker. Brendan specializes in broker who focuses on helping the owners and stewards of historical prominent buildings, which is everything in Main Street, right? Areas of expertise include insuring historic properties, theaters, museum, civic associations like Main Street America, hotels, churches, and historic homeowners. Welcome to you, Brendan. Thank you. And we're going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kayla. Thanks, Keith. Appreciate you having me on the call. Let me share my screen.
While Brendan's pulling that up, I know when I was the director in Excelsior Springs, we tapped into their services because we didn't have any local agents that understood Main Street and what we did. And it was very helpful to have an organization that's tied to not only preservation, but the national Main Street movement that understood what we were doing and helped us get the right insurance.
That's great. That's great. Thanks again, Gayla and Keith. I really appreciate you having me on the call. And thanks to everyone from Main Street, Missouri, being on the call as well. Again, my name is Brendan Moog, and I'm going to speak about insurance and risk management for Main Streets. So, Gayla told us a little bit about National Trust Insurance Services, who we work for, and we're essentially a subsidiary of the National Trust for Historic Preservation out of DC. And we were formed in 2003. And we're essentially a specialized broker to solely help the owners and stewards of historic properties and nonprofits throughout the country. We're based out of Baltimore, but we do work all throughout the country. We have a great relationship with Main Street America in Chicago. We attend the conference and support the conference every year, which we absolutely love. And we work with other museums, theaters, historic homeowners throughout the country. So really as it relates to historic and preservation, we're a one-stop shop brokerage in terms of insurance. So in terms of agenda, what I'm going to speak about is two really important areas of insurance. One is really how you transfer your risk to an insurance company and different insurance coverages that your Main Street organization needs. And then the second thing is how you protect yourself from different vendors that you may hire or contractors that you may hire to come in and maybe do a renovation or anything like that. So transferring risk to vendors and contractors. And then also take any questions that you may have, or after the presentation, you can always contact me. So getting into coverages that your organization needs, the two essential coverages that you need to carry are, one is general liability, and the second is directors and officers liability for your board and key employees. And within general liability, you can have liquor liability as well as event liability, which we'll get into. So in terms of miscellaneous coverages that you may not think about, volunteer accident, property coverage, workers' compensation, umbrella liability, which would sit over your general liability, which would be extra coverage, any auto, cyber liability, and then employment practices liability that would be a part of your directors and officers liability if you have employees. So let's get into general liability and what it means. So really, general liability provides coverage for claims arising from insurance business operations. For example, it would protect you and your organization from claims that someone was hurt at one of your events. So it's essentially third-party bodily injury claims. And the coverage there includes the legal defense and indemnity, okay? To give you an example of a general liability scenario, and we use the hot dog vendor, coming to the annual farmers market that a Main Street organization hosts. So an out-of-town vendor comes in and sells hot dogs that unfortunately results in event patrons getting food poisoning. It's terrible. They sell bad hot dogs. Some of the patrons get really, really sick from the hot dogs. In turn, the patrons sue the Main Street organization for medical injuries suffered as a result of the food poisoning. So the subsequent lawsuit legal bills are going to be handled by a standard general liability policy. So that's really general liability and an example within the hot dog vendor. And then you'll continue to see the hot dog vendor as I continue to go on in the presentation and how it all comes together. So this directors and officers liability, it protects the organization, its employees, board members, volunteers against claims arising out of alleged wrongful acts related to the organization's activities. Essentially, wrongful acts could be mismanagement, breach of duty, misappropriation of funds, And this would also include the legal defense and indemnity within directors and officers. So a directors and officers scenario here as we talk about the hot dog vendor. As a result of the investigation surrounding the food poisoning issue that we had, it's discovered that the hot dog vendor had a long and well-known track record of selling expired hot dogs. And moreover, the vendor didn't hold proper licenses to sell the food, and the organization, the Main Street organization, never asked for the documentation from the vendor. So subsequently, the attorneys alleged that the organization failed to properly vet the vendor, and that's a big deal. So allegations are brought to, the directors and officers of mismanagement on a part of the board. So that's a D&O liability scenario. Here's some miscellaneous additional coverages that your Main Street organization can buy if you have these exposures. So there's volunteer accident. It's really cheap. It's $300, but if you rely on volunteer labor to work your events, it's really nice added coverage. If you own any property, that's what our firm specializes in, are buildings and business personal property. So if you need any help with property, we do a lot of properties throughout the United States. If you have any full or part-time employees, you need workers' comp. And then from an umbrella perspective, that would sit over your general liability and give you higher limits of liability. Auto, if you own or rent any vehicles, do your employees use personal vehicles for work? So you could have auto coverage. Event cancellation, which Andrew will talk to a lot about. So do you rely on any single large events for sole primary source of revenue? So event cancellation insurance. And then cyber liability is becoming bigger and bigger throughout the United States with cyber situations happening. And this essentially if you store personal data of donors, it could really help there. So could you have protected yourselves from the hot dog vendor? That's the big question. And so now we get on talking about the three-legged stool of risk management. So the three-legged stool of risk management is really important because if you have all these parts of the three legs, you're protected. So one is the contract, the other is having a certificate of insurance, and the other is being an additional insured. So as it relates to the contract, every time you hire a vendor or contractor, you need to enter into a written agreement that explains the services being provided. It's important. The contract will include various parts provisions. It'll include indemnification clause, insurance the vendor contractor will carry, the length of the contractual relationship, and the services being provided. And you can ask an attorney to help draft a standard contract for you. They should be able to do it very, very quickly. But it's an important part of the process. So getting into indemnity agreements, it's part of the contract. It's essentially a legal binding agreement between two parties specifying that one party, the indemnifying party, will compensate the other party, the indemnified party, for any loss or damages that may arise from a particular event or circumstance. In really layman's terms, the hot dog vendor will compensate the Main Street organization for the negligent actions caused by the hot dog vendor. So that's the indemnity agreement. Here's an example of insurance requirements that would be in the contract. They're very basic. It talks about general liability and having $1 million each occurrence. You being added as an additional insured on that vendor or contractor's insurance, and just overall different requirements within the contract that you can use. So this is an example of a certificate of insurance. So this is also really important. You're going to have the vendor's name, which would be the insured. You're going to have the insurance company's name. You will have the coverage. So here is commercial general liability, and you'll see that the Main Street organization is an additional insured with the X. You'll have the policy number and then the policy effective date. So this is July 1st, 2017 to July 1st, 2018. If you're having an event and you're hiring this vendor, they need to have insurance within this time frame. And this essentially says this certificate of liability shows you that the vendor or contractor you're working with has insurance and they are legit and you can work with them. And then on the other side of their certificate is your organization being named as a certificate holder, as an additional insured on their insurance. So the additional insured and status is really important. It's being an additional insured. It really entitles you to the benefits of their insurance policy and will directly protect you. So when the hot dog vendor does something stupid and sells bad hot dogs, that's not on your insurance. That's on theirs when you have all these different legs, parts of the leg taken care of. So that's additional insured status. So are you protected as an organization when you're working with vendors and contractors? So let's go over the 4 things. Do you have a contract? Yes. Does your contract have an indemnification clause holding you harmless? Yes. Did you collect a proof of insurance or certificate of insurance? Yes. Is your organization an additional insured? Yes. And if you say yes to all 4 of those things, you are protected from vendors or contractors if something goes wrong with them and they make a mistake. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I really appreciate your time. My goal was to be a resource for everyone on the call. So if there's anything you need, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help you in any way.
So many questions.
Yes, yes, exactly. Thank you, Brendan. Oh my goodness, everybody needs just that checklist. Do you have these things?
Yeah.
So that was great.
Yeah, and I love how you explained it too about transferring the insurance. I know that we've had several Main Street programs reach out to us, particularly related to events that have alcohol. And
Yeah.
if there are wineries there, or the Main Street program isn't serving the alcohol, but other folks are, it's transferring that liability to the folks that are experts in that and have a liquor license, helps them get a better rate for insurance for events that have liquor. Is that a good interpretation, Brendan?
Yes, that's a great interpretation. In fact, I was on a liquor liability call yesterday with USLI, which is a carrier of ours, and they were talking about liquor liability insurance and how important it is. And to your point, a lot of the Main Street organizations, they won't be in the business of buying and selling alcohol, so they hire a vendor.
Right.
But it's important for them to go through those 3 steps, to have the contract, to have their certificate of insurance, and to be an additional insured on their insurance. So if someone is overserved and they get in an accident, they won't come back to the Main Street organization. They're gonna go to that vendor, and that's gonna be on the vendor's insurance, not
Right.
theirs.
Yeah. The other thing I liked about, and I know several local insurance companies do this too, but understanding the events that Main Street's put on. And I think that's where your company really has been helpful, at least to me in the past, is we went through the events and how did they take place? If it's an event that people are going in and out of various businesses using the city sidewalks, and there's no alcohol involved, our liability was very, very small. And so, talking through the events and what takes place, is there a parade? Those sorts of things that
Right.
can be higher liability pieces, but not just getting a blanket general liability or event insurance, but talking through those events and what's involved to help identify the potential either high risk or very,
Yep.
very low risk.
Yep. Yeah,
So,
so go ahead, Gayla.
no, I was just going to say, Brendan, we had a question from Lisa. How do you handle donated space for events? Is there a different contract for that? Same rules apply? Question mark.
So is the donated space owned by another organization?
That's my
I
assumption. Yeah, it sounds like they're probably holding an event at a place as Main Street and someone's donating the space.
Yeah, so they would work with the company or the organization that owns that space to make sure that they were, going through their expectations of insurance and having the contract and the certificates of insurance and being an additional assured within each other. I think that's important to make sure that they're communicating, because if the Main Street organization doesn't own the property, but they're going to be on site, it's important that they're just communicating and going through the process.
I think that's
And
a good point.
that's a regular thing in Main Street. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna
Yeah.
say, we take it for granted when someone donates it to us. We don't want to ask a lot of questions, but yeah, we need to think about liability.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Brendan. Just for
Thank you for
everybody.
having me.
Oh, you are so welcome. If you guys have questions, and as we're going through this, you have more questions, we'll have more answers to those questions at the end. All right. So we're going to now begin with Andy. Andy started his insurance business, or started with insurance with Lockton Affinity in 2006. Andy currently is working for Vortex Insurance Agency since 2016 to help build and expand their weather insurance, and all of those things that goes underneath that. It really exceeds what our need is, or I hope it exceeds what our need is here in Missouri, since many of us are working through the challenges of weather. And Andy, as you guys will see, is very tan today because he just came back from Hawaii. So he should be fresh and just give us all kinds of good information how to work this. So thank you, Andy, for being part of this webinar. And we're going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gayla. What an excellent setup this is. From Bethany talking about disaster preparation and disaster relief and fundraising to Brandon talking about risk mitigation and insurance. And that's where kind of I come into play, although it's a different type of insurance. I specialize in weather risk insurance, specifically rain insurance. So before I get into the slideshow, I kind of want to explain kind of who we are, what we do. Rain insurance is an insurance product. It's the same contractual type of risk transfer that Brandon talks about. The main difference being is it's more of an event-based policy. So when a Main Street organization has a high dollar event, the expectation is you're trying to gather that much needed revenue in terms of donations. If it rains, people don't show up, you lose those very important donations. But then even more importantly, you lose that money that you've already invested in trying to set up the event itself. The security, the tents, the fences, the porta potties, all of that money is built-in expenses. And if it rains and people don't show up, you're not getting that revenue in return. And so what do you do to recoup that revenue? And that's where we come into play. So I'll get into the slideshow here. So
Perfect.
Again, just briefly, I'm with Vortex Insurance, weather insurance, Vortex Insurance Agency. As Gayla mentioned, we've been in the insurance risk business since 2008. I've been with the company since 2016. What I really want to express with this slide here is who I am and who I represent. So technically, I am an agent just like Brandon is. The difference with what we do or how I represent the company is I represent our carrier, our insurance carrier that offers the weather protection for any sort of organization that needs it. And by saying this, it's an important point, especially for Main Street organizations, is that I work with local agents, and I'm happy to work with local agents. I'm happy to work with even Brandon. If you want to work with Brandon and you had an outdoor event and maybe you wanted some insurance and you wanted to put it through him, that's no problem. That's what we do here. We're what's called a managing general underwriter here. So you could either talk to me, you could talk to your local agent, have them talk to me. I'm more than happy to help them through the process because this is a new type of insurance that many people don't understand. Many people don't even know it exists. So it's important to have somebody kind of on your side to help you kind of guide you through the process and help you build a policy that's right for you. Because in addition to that, and what I'll get into within the slideshow is this is a very, very customizable product. So you could really build it however you wish, depending upon your needs and your budget. Our two main products, hourly rate insurance and hurricane insurance. Obviously, with this being Missouri, we're not too concerned about hurricanes here. Fingers crossed. But hourly rate insurance is a key component and a key risk mitigation product that I think would be very helpful to any Main Street organization that has any sort of outdoor event where the expectation is people are going to show up and the expectation is, they're going to buy beer and merchandise, and most importantly, they're going to donate. So what is rain insurance? What exactly is it? So it's considered a parametric insurance policy, and parametric means basically it's based on an index. So a parametric policy is based on a specific event, i.e. rainfall, that can be measured by an independent third party within a set time period. If the event occurs, it triggers a pre-agreed insurance payout. The conditions and outcomes are decided before the policy starts. So this is very important when it comes to rain insurance is the transparency portion of our product. You know exactly what you're getting before you sign the dotted line. So when I present you an insurance policy or insurance quote, you know the hours you have coverage, you know the date you have coverage, you know exactly where the rainfall is being measured. In most cases, it's your exact site using independent third-party radar data, and you know what the premium is. So if the specific rain event were to occur, so for example, let's say you had an event and you wanted coverage from noon to 6 p.m. And if a quarter inch of rain falls, I want to get paid $10,000. That is what the quote is going to be for. Depending upon several factors, you'll have a certain premium. But you either agree to it or you don't, just like a normal insurance contract. But with rain insurance is you know exactly what you're getting if that occurs. So it's already agreed upon. Noon to 6, quarter inch of rain, $10,000. If that happens, you get paid $10,000 instantly. I say instantly. Honestly, we'll get the data probably 24 to 48 hours after. The check gets sent to our, or the claim gets sent to our insurance carrier. The check gets sent out typically in about a 3-day window. So typically you get that money when you need it most after an event like that occurs. And this is really a gap filler. So when you have your property, your liability, your D&O, all of those types of insurance policies are very important in terms of asset protection. When we're talking about rain insurance, that's more for balance sheet protection to smooth your revenues in the event you have rainfall during that big 4th of July parade or event, or that big Memorial Day downtown event where you have a concert and you've paid somebody, to entertain folks. Obviously, a lot of times when you have a concert or some sort of entertainer, there's a deposit that's non-refundable, regardless of what happens, if you have the event or not. Those types of expenses you lose if you don't make that money back in terms of donations and selling concessions and such. And that's, again, where rain insurance comes into play and can really help your organization if you were to have those types of events. So getting into more benefits of parametric insurance or rain insurance, I talked about the quick and transparent claim payments. So if you were to have a claim, if it rains and it meets the terms of your policy, determined by an independent third party, not determined by us. Obviously, you don't want us measuring the rainfall. There's an independent third party that measures the rainfall. We collect that data, and if the data reads that it meets the threshold of your policy, you get paid, no questions asked. There's no need for investigations or claim adjusters when it comes to our policies because it's based on a predefined trigger. You say what the threshold is within your policy, whether that be 0.2 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, whatever that may be. That's when the trigger occurs. That's when you get paid. Again, there's no looking at your revenues or your books, and there's no saying, okay, how much money did you make at this event? That's how much we're going to pay you back, because that's how much you're expected to lose. Again, it all comes down to whatever your limit is. Whatever your limit is, that's what you can get paid. The policy pays automatically, no questions asked. Again, very simple, very transparent. And what really makes this advantageous from a consumer standpoint is, in terms of our insurance, you really, as a consumer, you're kind of on equal footing with the insurance carrier, in the fact that you determine the terms and the insurance company is going to pay. That's the expectation. But instead of the insurance company coming in and defining whether or not, is there any exclusions? Is this an included claim? Do you have this coverage in place? Are there sublimits? Are there deductibles? All of that doesn't matter when it comes to our insurance. So it comes down to, again, that independent third-party data. Did it meet the terms of the policy? Yes, you get paid. Another advantage with our type of insurance is you use that money however the Main Street organization wants. So when you get that check, you could put it towards next year's event. You could put it towards paying those expenses that have already been paid for, that you didn't recoup due to that rainfall. You can use it for, paying volunteers that had to sit in the rain. It doesn't matter to us. That's your organization's money. You do with it what you wish. One quick little caveat in terms of Brandon's presentation is he mentioned event cancellation. This is not event cancellation insurance. Rain insurance will pay regardless of cancellation or postponement. The only thing we're looking at is a threshold within an index. So did the rainfall threshold meet the terms of the policy, yes or no? The event could have been canceled. The event could have pushed on. In many cases, in most scenarios, if you have rain, you push through. It's a rain or shine event. We're gonna do this regardless of rain or not. But unfortunately, if it does rain, people don't care if it's rain or shine. They're not going to show up in many cases, and they're not going to spend the important dollars that you need to collect for that event. So in terms of rain insurance, this is another key component, is the fact that you don't have to cancel. There is no burden of proof of cancellation or postponement. If the rainfall threshold is met, you get paid, regardless of if you push through, if you didn't. That doesn't matter to us. So policy structuring and customizations, again, as I mentioned earlier, rain insurance is very, very customizable. You could build it however you want. It's very flexible. There's almost an endless amount of possibilities. So when it comes to your event, you know your event best. What are the hours most critical where if rainfall were to occur, you're going to lose the most attendance? Is this a wine and dine where maybe it's an evening type of event? Is this a more of an early type of an event where, a 10 a.m. setup or 10 a.m. start and it goes through 3 or 4 p.m., where maybe that 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. window is most critical? Is there a concert? Is there a fireworks show? In that case, maybe a 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. window, 4th of July type event, that would be most critical. What I'm trying to explain here with this is, if you have an event that many times it's maybe 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., 12 hours, 13 hours, 14 hours, you don't have to insure the full 14 hours or 13, 12 hours of your event, because that really manages the cost of the premium. The longer the time period that you insure, the higher the premium, because obviously the longer the time period, the most likely it would probably rain during that time period. Shorter time periods are lower premium. With rain insurance, it's very easy to get a premium that is unaffordable if you structure it improperly. And this goes back to having your agent talk to me. If you have an agent that you prefer working with, have them talk to me. Let me try to guide them through these premium types of building and structuring, or talk to me directly. I'm more than happy to kind of guide you through those kind of structuring tools to give you a premium that's most affordable. Because with rain insurance, we can offer a premium that's a $5,000 premium for a $10,000 policy. That's possible. If you're in Miami around this time of year, you want a policy from noon to 8 p.m. for $10,000, that's probably going to be $5,000 if you want a low threshold. because it rains so often there. It all comes down to historical data and such. And I'll get into that as well. But the key with what I'm trying to explain here is structuring is so important when it comes to building an insurance policy or a rain insurance policy, so it fits your specific needs and your budget. You know your event the best. You know what's going to, attract the most people. You know when most people are going to come to your event, and you also maybe in some previous events or poor weather type situations, when people don't show up. So what are those hours? How can we build something that best fits your organization and cover you during those most critical hours? So if rain were to occur, you get paid. So pricing, of course, one of the number one questions is with insurance, how much does it cost? And of course, the number one answer with an agent is, well, it depends. So with that, I want to try and be a little more detailed in trying to explain this to you. So in terms of rain insurance, there are many different factors that build the premium or that go into the premium. At your location, is it historically wet or is it historically dry time of year? With Missouri, I'm in Kansas City. We just had a heavy rainstorm, heavy rain showers. It's early June. It happens here, pretty much anywhere in Missouri. That's why they call it the show me state. Yeah. If you're worried about the weather, call me tomorrow. It'll change. But with that being known, the more common the rain is during your event period or during the time period that you want to have insured is a risk factor. If it's a drier part of the year, the rates are going to be low. If it's a wetter part of the year, the rates are going to be typically higher. The time of day is also a risk factor. Typically, sunrise and sunset hours are more expensive than different parts of the day or overnight hours. Those are the hours meteorologically are most common to have pop-up rainstorms. So those rates are going to be higher than different parts of the day. Ultimately, every combination of hours and dates have a unique risk factor based on historical data. And that's how the premium is built. It's based on, how likely is it going to rain this amount at this location during these hours? An algorithm is built, and that's how the premium is decided upon. And this gets back into the customization. So when if you are interested in rain insurance, there's a lot of back and forth. There's, okay, let's try, what does noon to 8 look like? Okay, that's too expensive. Well, what does 1 to 7 look like? What about a slightly higher threshold? My goal, whenever I'm offering premium to my clients, is to have the rate be 10% of the limit or less. So if you were to ask me, I want a $10,000 policy for my 4th of July event, I'm going to present you options that are going to be $1,000 at the highest amount, and then working my way down, giving you higher threshold options at lower premium amounts. And you can kind of see and gauge, okay, is it worth spending $1,000, or maybe I can have a slightly higher threshold and spend $800 for this policy. Pricing is a little different in terms of traditional insurance as well. I'm sorry, I kind of skipped there. It is more expensive than traditional insurance in some cases, but in some cases it's not, depending upon, again, how you structure it. The pricing is the way it is the bottom here is the pay in full mechanism, the instant payout type of mechanism that occurs within our rain insurance policy. Because again, if you have a $10,000 policy, you're going to get paid $10,000, no questions asked. Whereas like you have an auto insurance policy, you get into a car wreck, a fender bender, you pay your $500 deductible, the mechanic repairs your $1,000 fender bender, and you basically have the insurance company pay $500 for you've got a policy that's probably worth $20,000-$30,000 for a $30,000 car. With rain insurance, there is no partial payments; it's pay in full, immediate. So that does allow for that instant payout mechanism allows for slightly higher premiums that you're probably used to. You're probably used to seeing $1 million general liability policy that costs you $500, $750. With rain insurance, it's a little different because of the likelihood of the event, the historical likelihood, and the pay in full type of mechanism and how that works. So that's it. A lot of times I have a lot of questions when it comes to rain insurance. So I will pause there, and if anybody has any questions, obviously my contact information is right there. So feel free to email me, call me. Also, again, give this to your agent. Have them email or call me. If you're comfortable working with your local agent, I know with Main Street, it's important to keep the local business in house. We've got no problem doing that. I'm not in the business of stepping on toes.
That's great. That's wonderful. And you really did a great job of describing it, Andrew. I know that when we first started in Main Street in Excelsior Springs, we had some questions about that because we had, of course, as most Main Street organizations, many events outside. And one of them was a major fundraiser. And, we looked at it, but I don't think we had the knowledge that you shared today of, kind of how to look at it. I think it was ensuring the entire event, and there was just no way we could afford that. But I think how you presented it in looking at different ways and also, at least covering your expenses, maybe if it's a very expense heavy event and rain would, cause a loss. We don't want that to happen in the Main Street world. So at least, make the organization even. Could potentially be the goal instead of recouping everything potentially.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. That all comes into the kind of negotiation process and structuring the policy that best fits any specific organization.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate that.
The weather history would be great for our organizations as well. If you run all that data for them, okay, these are the 5 events we have. What is the percentage of the time that normally we get this kind of rain? And
that's a great comment. That's a great comment because within my organization, since we underwrite the coverage, we've got all the data in house. So if you were to email me and say, hey, what does the weather look like in St. Louis the last 5 Julys? I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I'll give you the hourly data. You could look at it. Obviously, that's not going to predict what's going to happen in the future, but you get a guide. You can get a guide and see, okay, what happened that 4th of July last year? We got poured on. How much rain actually happened? I can do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's great.
Brendan, Bethany, please come back on screen. We want to say thank you. We're over time, but that's great because we had lots of good comments and questions, and all 3 of you, I think, provided very, very valuable information to our Main Street programs. And like I said, this will go on our YouTube page, and I'm sure we will reference back to it. With our Main Street folks to refer back to this as they get new leadership or have questions that come up. Bethany, any update on the Booms Tracker business inventory?
No word from Dr. Mike, but I will gladly send you an update, Keith, and you can share with everyone.
It's awful early on the West Coast.
It is awful.
That's right. Thank you all very, very much. This was fantastic. A webinar almost with our new community starting out. Keith, this is a webinar that they all should watch. And then we always put it in the rotation every few years as board members change. We need to rewatch this. So fantastic information shared, you guys.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I think we'll be in touch with all of you about maybe future workshops or in-person workshops, things like that, because I think this is a subject that we need to, of course, keep talking about.
Yes, it is.
We appreciate it.
All
Thank
right.
you all for joining us, and we'll see you on our next Mornings on Main.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.